So hello everyone, we are here with Juan-Pablo. He is a partner at Action Potential Venture Capital. So hey Juan, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us about your journey? Like how did you get into healthcare venture capital?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Davia, and really appreciate having an opportunity to talk to the audience here at HBC VC podcast. So, um, my path into healthcare venture capital came from starting as an engineer, studying electrical engineering, um, doing that for undergraduate, doing it for a master's degree. During my master's degree at Stanford, I was involved sort of intimately with a medical device program called the Biodesign Program, and I worked closely with physicians in the hospital who were developing, either tools for research or their own sort of potential new medical devices, and helping them with that as a research assistant, an RA. And from there, I went off to work in industry, to work at Medtronic in both engineering and marketing capacities in their cardiovascular division in Boston. Did a short stint at Eli Lilly. In fact, Eli Lilly, I have to give them a little bit of a shout out here because they gave me a fellowship to the Stanford GSB Business School. It's intended for, it's called the Benini Fellowship, and it's intended for one underrepresented minority each class of the GSB. So there's one new Benini Fellow every year. And as part of that, I spent a year at Eli Lilly in Indianapolis, working on the pharma side of the industry, and went to business school where they sponsored me. After or during business school, I actually took an internship at a healthcare venture fund called Morgan Thaler Ventures on Sand Hill Road, and that turned into a full-time offer at the beginning of my second year in business school, which I gladly accepted. And it wasn't my initial intent to get into venture capital. I kind of thought I was going to become an entrepreneur founder, but I had such a great experience with that team, and really came to love the venture side of things that I jumped on it after graduating business school. So that was in 2010 timeframe.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you actually have direct experience working in healthcare. Wow. So I'm assuming you can give like great guidance to the companies that you invest in terms of like navigating that space.
Yeah, I mean, I try to. I think some of it from my operating experience when it's relevant, because I was in a very specific area. I think my network that I developed by working at Medtronic and Eli Lilly really helped a lot, because they're folks that I to this day stay in touch with and lean on when I'm looking for perhaps some expertise in a particular area. And I do think it helps give you credibility. And I know it helped me land my internship in venture capital just by virtue of being able to say, hey, I'm familiar with the industry. I've seen a certain number of data points out there on what looks good, what doesn't. And so, yeah, absolutely. Operating experience, I think, is one really key thing that can help give sort of put the foot in the door and give a leg up getting into venture.
Yeah, and so now you currently have the role as a partner at Action Potential Venture Capital. Yeah, and so can you tell us about what you look for in a company, like what makes a great startup to you?
So, it's oftentimes pretty specific to the sector I'm in which, meaning it may be a little bit different for tech founders, software businesses versus life sciences, med device, or biotech. But in what I do mostly now is life sciences and med device. It's key that the people are trustworthy, honest, transparent. We really like sort of tenacious problem solvers who are just never satisfied not knowing, and are constantly digging to find the answers. Folks who are confident but humble, folks who seek help when they need it rather than trying to deny that they need it, or to us that's the recipe for winning in the long haul. Folks who have other former colleagues and employees wanting to work with them again is terrific. I mean, it just speaks about their culture, that they developed their management style, And then, of course, just their overall ability to sort of sell and recruit, sell the story, fundraise, hire great people. So that combination is rare, but something we're always looking for. Having done it before is terrific. Having some track record, ideally in starting a company, helps, because it just means there's fewer lessons to learn along the way. But that's frankly not always possible, and not always the case when you have a first-time entrepreneur founder coming up with a great idea or passionate about something.
So I guess like a question that I have, given the industry of healthcare, I guess a lot of the founders that may be starting these types of companies, they may be, I guess, scientists or like really smart people that know science on a deep level. Do you ever find that when they are pitching to you that sometimes they focus like too much on the science, which can be very complicated for like a business person who doesn't necessarily understand, versus like the business model?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a common mistake, or not mistake, but just tendency, for a lot of scientific or technical founders. Listen, I think when it's an important ability to be able to articulate how, what you're trying to develop works and why it should work. I think the answer is best given when it can be given simply and in layman terms, because you're often talking to a broad audience. Even at a venture fund, like the ones that we work in, there are some that are very, some people, partners are very focused on medical devices, others on biotech, some that have experience with cancer, and others with cardiovascular or women's health or what have you. And so just speaking at a basic level, with the ability to go deeper either themselves or just handing it off to a colleague or saying, I'm going to follow up with a lot more detail there. I don't need to get into the weeds here today. You have to be able to tell the full story about the business model, the market opportunity, the differentiation. And if you spend too long in the weeds or trying to perhaps speak over somebody's head who's not absorbing it all, it's just not productive for anybody. So I think finding that right balance and know your audience.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about the diligence process for healthcare startups or life sciences? Given, I don't know if you would say they are more risky given they directly impact someone's health, but given like requirements such as like FDA approval and those types of things, like how do you look at it? Is the way that you look at a company in terms of diligence a little different from like maybe a consumer startup?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the risk is different. I do think that safety is, foremost in the minds of the founders, the regulatory bodies, the physicians that are considering, either being part of a clinical trial, certainly the patients that are, involved in those studies. So there is a different type of risk where it's health and life, and we take it really seriously. The regulatory bodies like FDA, like those in the rest of the world, really have checks and balances in place, or stage gate kind of procedures to make sure you've done the testing on the bench, and oftentimes in preclinical animal models, or and have fail safes in place for your technologies depending on how they interact with the patient. So it is different risk, but from an execution perspective, from a startup, that is something that that you can know going in most often in terms of how much you need to address the particular regulatory requirements, and that for investors, is for those that are experienced investing in that area, is also something that is generally known. So that can be assessed during a diligence process. There are other things that are a function of the clinical data generated, or the market and insurance policies, for instance, reimbursement, and how it gets paid for. It's a critical difference between a consumer, direct-to-consumer product, or something that gets paid for by insurance and is reimbursable. And I think that business model, those are very different business models, even in medical devices and what we invest in. It's not always clear that the company will begin commercializing with a reimbursement in place, a reimbursed sort of code in place. They may start by selling directly to consumers and having patients pay out of pocket. So with a transition in mind down the line, you have to evaluate both scenarios. Would patients pay out of pocket for this technology? And can you generate enough data and health economic data too to support Medicare, Medicaid, private payers to reimburse it? So there are a variety of other things that go beyond purely the market and the technology and the people, such as IP. Intellectual property tends to be more important, I would say, in some of these longer development cycle type healthcare companies and life science companies. But again, it's a different type of investing. It's a different type of company formation, but it's something that's manageable and navigable once you kind of know what to look out for.
Yeah, and I see that you are a board member on like a few startups. So can you tell us about a startup that you've invested in and why you believe they were a winner?
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, I think we believe all our companies are winners, of course. But that's true of most VCs, right? And most of our companies. Thankfully, we have a lot. I have a lot that I could talk about. I guess instead of going deep on any one, I'll maybe touch on a few. I'd just say that, in the field that we invest in, which is predominantly neurostimulation, therapeutic neurostimulation, so stimulating a nerve to treat a chronic disease instead of using drug therapy, for instance. We have a company called Saluda Medical that stimulates the spinal cord to treat chronic back pain and leg pain. And their differentiation and platform technology is sort of first in class, that simultaneously records what the spinal cord responses to that stimulation to dial in the perfect settings for that patient to optimize the long-term pain relief. And frankly, just to have some sort of feedback from the body that says, we're doing what we expect to do under all circumstances, in all postures, positions, independent of your orientation, that the therapy is being optimized. So that's a company out of Sydney, Australia, that we've invested in. Another one called Nuspera Medical actually has a Black CEO founder, Milton Morris, and the company has developed a wireless powering technology out of Stanford to stimulate small electrodes or neurostimulators deep in the body, and has also a platform technology that can be used throughout the body, and is very much optimized for sending wireless energy and finding its target in the body, independent of orientation, depth, size, et cetera. Some technical challenges that have been hard to overcome up until now. And that company's in clinical trials. We have an investment in a company called Cala Health, which is a neurostimulator that's actually worn on a wrist to treat essential tremor, and has a female technical founder out of Stanford. Her name's Kate Rosenbluth, and CEO's name is Renee Ryan, and they're now commercially available, FDA approved and cleared, and are developing a variety of therapies that can be essentially prescribed to a patient by a neurologist or a physician, and have the product shipped to them and body worn, as opposed to being permanently implantable. Our last investment we just made announced last week, is a company called Echo Imaging, and it's a new category of ultrasound technology, ultrasound on a chip, that's hoping to drive access to medical imaging around the world by bringing the cost down greatly, and allow connect to an iPhone or Android phone, and allow physicians at the point of care to get the information they need to make better clinical decisions, and independent of whether or not that's in a developed market with a high-tech hospital system or in the field. So those are just some examples of different companies we've invested in.
Wow, sounds like some really cool and impactful investments. So I guess to pivot a little bit, something that we hear about often in the startup and VC space is about the lack of minority VCs, and in return, a lack of founders receiving capital. And you co-founded an organization, Latinx VC. Can you tell us about this organization and why you believe that it is important?
Yeah, absolutely. Latinx VC was founded last year, and it was really inspired. A friend of mine, Jacob Mullins, who's at Shasta Ventures, was a Kaufman Fellow, classmate of Elliot Robinson, who started Black VC with their founding board. We've essentially look to, in many ways mirror the good work that they have started to do. They started Black VC 3 or 4 years, I think, before we started Latinx VC, but with a similar mission of increasing the representation of Black and Brown and specifically Latina venture capitalists in the industry, helping minorities and enter into the industry, be promoted, help them get to check writing positions, partner level positions in venture funds, help them, those that are looking to raise their own venture funds as emerging managers, connect with LPs, help become a bit more of a central repository for connecting job opportunities from credible firms to credible candidates. So we do some vetting of candidates when we match make and put forward candidates. And going forward, I think our ambitions are growing, and perhaps we may start to do some content and mentorship and formal programs. And I think with that, we'll be doing fundraising as well to support those activities. So it's very much in motion, but we have a founding board of, I believe it's about 9 of us. And you can take a look more at latinxvcs.com if anybody's interested in learning more. Certainly follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, it's really cool from what I've seen on the website. And I guess, like, for you, how do you see the future of like venture capital in regards to more Black and Brown people having investment decisions and or raising funding rounds? Like, I guess the type of impacts they may that could have.
Yeah, no, it's the key question we are always asking ourselves, and no question about it. It's increasing slowly, but I think we're all trying to make sure the slope of that line goes up more aggressively, and that the glass ceiling is broken, so that Black and Brown investors can be decision makers in funds, can be have the relationships with the LPs that are longer lasting, and it starts with access. The access to those. It's a bit of a cottage industry, venture capital, and it's largely an apprenticeship model historically. It's not the only way to do it, but that's how many folks who've entered VC have learned, is under the wings of more senior investors. But if you don't have access via your networks, via your university, your alumni base, whatever that is, it's much more challenging to even be considered. And then once you're even considered, do you look and act like the people there that are hiring? And we all know that makes a huge impact subconsciously and bias around how people are ultimately selected for these roles. So I think what we're trying to do is, and I know HBCU VC shares this, is really trying to educate all sides, all parts of that spectrum, both the candidates that are coming up on how to act with confidence, conviction, generate the depth of knowledge, improve their communication skills and know the terminology, find the allies in the industry and accept that help. Naturally need to go and perform and exceed expectations. All of the venture industry is largely weighed on financial returns, and so at the end of the day, you have to also be, a top investor with, and that takes time to determine and to be established. So there's there's a lot of growing that takes place, but we're also educating, we're trying to educate the hiring partners, and that's both in traditional institutional VCs, but also in corporate ventures capital. And as we've seen historically, corporate VC has been a bit more accessible to Black and Brown investors, especially when it comes to check writing levels and so forth. So, we're really trying to drive some change in our lifetime, so we can have a measurable impact on this industry. And obviously it trickles down to what founders, what companies are funded, what communities are funded, and who then has the opportunity to pay it forward to the next generation. And so yeah, I mean, it's a complex challenge, but I think there's enough people talking about it now that I'm hopeful that we'll see real changes in representation in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, and I guess, do you have any advice to, I guess, minority founders that are looking to raise a round? I guess you mentioned like not having access to like networks is a common challenge. So like how do these founders get over these common challenges that make it difficult for them to like actually raise funding to scale their business?
Yeah, I mean, it's there are many ways to go about doing it, but I do think that some of the most go to where people are. So one is aggressive networking. That's something I've always, and by aggressive networking I just mean consistent, prioritized networking. Obviously doing it in the right way matters, but that network takes time to build, and there's no better time than now. And so just starting, and it has network effects, and it has sort of exponential ability to really pay dividends, perhaps further out than you can see over the horizon, but it's worth the effort to put it in now. And frankly, not viewing it as a chore, or not viewing it as the price to pay to get into venture, but I find that people who are most successful networking really enjoy it, right? So seeking that those learnings, and then other things that can be done, obviously more like imminently, if you're looking to raise now, is there are a number of incubators, accelerators, prizes and awards. Seeking those as much as you can, getting up on stage, being in front of a broader audience, so that you leverage the people that are in the room, even if you don't necessarily sit down one-on-one with them right away. They know of you. You can reference those activities. So sort of aligning yourself with some of those brands that are out there, I think, is a good way to do it. And I guess the other thing is just making it clear as people get to know you that you are an expert in your domain, whatever that is that you're starting a company to do. I mean, I'm always most impressed by people who have just sat down and become foremost experts in anything that they can gather on this, and educate everybody around us, so that number one, it speaks, it makes us want to either invest in you, and number two, it certainly makes us feel better about introducing you to other people we know in our industry to help you, even if we can't invest or don't, wouldn't be investing in that stage or something. So I feel 10 times better when a founder sits there and does a terrific job of convincing me they've done their homework, they have their head on straight, they are committed, they're asking for what's reasonable, they have big ambitions, and if I introduce them to somebody else, I'm not going to be embarrassed because of their lack of knowledge, for instance, or something. And so that's a huge part of it to me.
Yeah, and one, thank you for that advice. It's definitely amazing. And I guess one of the hottest topics right now is definitely COVID-19. And given that you invest directly into the healthcare space, I'm just curious to know your thoughts around it. Do you believe that COVID-19 has maybe like sparked a lot of innovation in the space? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's rocked the world, no question about it. No matter where you are, there's some impact, right? And so in healthcare venture, it's been certainly central. Our fund, Action Potential, is affiliated with GlaxoSmithKline. So we're a corporate fund, one of their two corporate funds. And so we've seen our portfolio companies either determine if they have potential therapies for COVID that they're evaluating, companies that were certainly developing possible diagnostics. GSK and the big pharma companies are certainly working together and in partnership with one another and startups to be part of that. In fact, my old boss, Monsef Salawi, is now considered the, I don't know what his formal title is, but the vaccine czar for the US government, and considering what, trying to push resources towards the most promising vaccines in the space. So there are a lot of activities proactively going after how to treat this condition and the sort of the ripple effects of it. Things like making sure diagnostics like ultrasound imaging are there for more rapid triaging of patients. Respiratory ventilators are there to treat patients that are more severely on the spectrum of their disease, or severity of their disease. And then all of our companies, along with all the other venture capitalists that have looked at the industries that they're targeting, are impacted one way or the other. Unlike, say, hospitality and entertainment, other things that have been very impacted. In healthcare development, it's usually about, are you selling to your customers? Has that been disrupted by virtue of not being able to be face-to-face with people and travel limitations? Or are you developing a new product, in fact, running a clinical trial that's now been disrupted because patients can't get back into the hospital to have their, follow-up appointments and clinical endpoints measured? Those are the biggest impacts, I would say, to the startups that we work on. And thankfully, people are getting creative there too, telemedicine, telehealth, and considering that in trial design before they execute on a big, expensive clinical trial, to take into account that some of these things may pop up again, or that there may be another wave of COVID or what have you. So yeah, everybody's thinking about it, and certainly cash is king right now. People are trying to load the coffers to weather the storm if things get tough.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest takeaways in terms of healthcare, is all of the massive gaps within the space, and how, I guess, innovation was really needed before COVID, but it's definitely needed now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think creative approaches to business models and flexible products that kind of treat where people may be doing their work, how they're spending their free time, how they're spending their money, all those things have to be accounted for in business models right now. And I think all investors are asking the questions.
Yeah. So I guess one last question that we have before our time is up. Can you tell us about any key resources that has helped you as a VC, or that you recommend for founders?
It's a good question. I mean, to me, the biggest resources, I always have to, thank the folks who have helped, with scholarships and helped me and a lot of people I know get the training that we needed. So there's the GEM Foundation is another fellowship for underrepresented minorities studying engineering, and so they supported me through grad school. GE corporate foundations that have also supported me through fellowships, I think, are critical. When you get to the venture resources and founder resources, absolutely. For in the healthcare sort of, fierce biotech, fierce med tech, the daily publications that come out with, the latest in that field of what transactions occurred, what financings occurred, what products have been approved, where are key people in the industry moving, just as good reading to do. And again, it's something that I think you can only sustain if you truly find it interesting and enjoyable. So making sure you're picking an area you really like to stay on top of. I think, there are a variety of, like Dan Primack's venture capital publications and other dailies that, especially when I was getting earlier into venture, I was just reading those consistently. just to know who's who in the industry and what activities are going on, so that when I did sit down with somebody over a coffee or now Zoom, I could cite the latest headlines. And again, it's always about how do you give, and before asking for something. And so just being on top of things and being able to connect dots for other people in the field, is a great sign of like, I'm on top of this, I'm serious about this, and I'm not just sort of uh, you know kind of just playfully considering this as an option for my career. It's what I'm going to do no matter what. And hopefully the person on the other side of the table can be a part of that and help. For founder resources, absolutely. The I would say the again, back to sort of the I know J&J has an innovation center. There are a variety. There's Rock Health in San Francisco and has a national presence now. There are a variety of industry specific ones, not to mention Y Combinator and many of those, that honestly, even if you're not a member of those, if you can attend those conferences, those meetings, it's a great place to under more normal circumstances, to rub elbows and start to form some relationships that oftentimes come back to, didn't we meet at that conference? Didn't we meet, or didn't so-and-so put us in touch? And so I just think back to this networking, there's very little that beats it. And so it's probably the hardest time now to do all that with COVID and do that over Zoom. But I think that will only be for a period of time, and hopefully we're back to kind of more normal circumstances.
Oh yeah, this is the new normal though. Allegedly, right?
I think it's going to be tough for this to be the new normal forever. I mean, I think this will be a big part of how we interact, and hopefully diminishes like the unnecessary travel people were doing for a long time. But there's nothing that replaces a handshake and speaking to somebody face to face in person. So I think that's coming back too.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for those resources, and also just for volunteering your time to allow us to learn more about your journey and gain knowledge from your experience. Thank you. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. No, and if I could just make one more comment that I don't think I had a chance to mention. One thing about this industry and this, frankly, just working as a minority in any work setting, is that I know I struggle with was how much to conform, how much to assimilate into sort of the world that I was working into. And one thing that I've been really inspired, again, back to my friend Elliot Robinson at Black VC, and a bunch of other people I've seen who sort of succeeded in their career and feel more comfortable too, is just to bring your true self to work, your honest self to work. And I think there's a difference between, I struggled with how much to assimilate and conform to sort of corporate white America in my career, venture included. And I think I would say I personally didn't bring myself, my full self to work for many, many years. And one thing I've learned in the process is, the most important part is just communication, like your intellectual rigor, your smarts, but how do you communicate? And I do think conforming on communication that works for a particular culture is important, knowing the language, the vernacular, the terminology. But after that, there were a lot of things I didn't share about myself, and I don't think I came off as the rounded person that I am, Puerto Rican, Latino, bilingual, and so forth. I know leaving venture firms that I've left in the past before joining this one, on the way out, people were still surprised. Oh, you're bilingual? You speak Spanish? Where are you from? Oh. You're from Puerto Rico? And like, wow. It wasn't something that was front and center. And I don't think that if you want longevity in venture, and if you want upward mobility in venture, people really need to know you fully, as much as you can bring to a workplace, because they'll appreciate that. I think the place is worth sticking around. The people there will appreciate it and see the value in that. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that, because it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with, is how much do I bring to work? How much do I show of myself and give to people? But hopefully those words or that caution can be beneficial to somebody in the program.
Yeah, definitely. And especially when you say bring your whole self to work, because I know that is a challenge for a lot of minorities. And then I think also in the venture capital space, one thing that I've noticed that is much different from other professional fields is that personal branding is like something that's very important. So I think it may be challenging to develop a personal brand if you aren't able to be yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's critical, and I think it attracts people to you. It's makes you memorable. You know, your personal brand, of course, does that. Um, I think it shows that, you know, it gets people to realize that there are a lot of other ways to interact. I was a former college athlete. That was something that really connected me with a lot of people in the field that I was in, and yeah, so it's something hard for some, easier for others, but I do think it's critical because it brings the, you know, it brings sort of a different face of what venture capital honestly can look like, and what you know, what I think, you know, minorities and Black and brown founders and all of us bring to the table is much different perspective from all facets of life and all interests and all skills that we have. And so anyway, that's it. I think it's crucial.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that advice. And I do think that will be a great takeaway for someone, and including myself, of course. Yeah. So thank you for your time again, and I definitely appreciate all the knowledge. And I'll keep you up to date on the release and everything.